Mass Effect 3 is a great game. Yup, that's me. And you're probably wondering how I got into this mess. Well, it's a bit of a long essay, so grab a drink, sit down, and let's give it a watch. This video contains major spoilers for Baldur's Gate 3, The Witcher 3, and Mass Effect if it wasn't given away by the title. You have been warned. When you watch a movie or read a book, your experience with it rarely changes. Your appreciation for it might. You may look at it differently or notice something you hadn't the first time, but the media itself hasn't changed. Whenever you watch The Avengers, it ends with a Thanos snap. Neo never does take the blue pill. If only there were a form of entertainment that allowed us, the audience, to influence the way that the story develops. Certainly one better than an improv class. If only one existed. Oh wait. And video games are entirely unique in this way. In no other medium is it possible for the audience to influence the entire story as it unfolds. And even in a video game, telling a very direct story, the way in which we get there is rarely the same, either quicker or slower. The path that we take is entirely different each time. No two experiences exactly the same. But as video games evolved, so too did their abilities to tell compelling stories. When Chrono Trigger was released in the year of our Lord 1995, my mind was blown that it had 12 different endings, and 13 if you've played the remakes, and this was only the beginning. Nowadays, it's entirely expected for there to be elements of a story that is controlled by the player, even in games where it's least expected, like Call of Duty Black Ops. Developers know that this is something which audiences want, and it's not uncommon that we're promised that we'll be able to do whatever you want, that we matter. And yet, some games are undone by this very promise. There is nothing more frustrating than being promised that each decision we've made carries weight, that each is meaningful, only to find out that we arrive at the same destination no matter our choices. An illusion of choice. So sit back, crack a beverage, and enjoy as I discuss how modern games have incorporated player choices into them, and how this can utterly ruin them. The BioWare game, Mass Effect 1, is genre-defining in RPG storytelling. While the gameplay is somewhat generic, the storytelling elevates it to masterpiece status. The first of a chain of BioWare games along with Dragon Age that really elevated storytelling in the medium. The game follows the story of Commander Shepard, a fully customizable male or female character in a galaxy on the brink of chaos. A compelling space opera, the game contains several critical decisions which impact the game's narrative direction and outcomes. The plot begins with Shepard being sent to investigate an attack on the human colony of Eden Prime. It's discovered there that an ancient race of sentient machines has resurfaced known as the Geth. And the Geth are being led by Sovereign Arturius, who seeks to revive the Reapers, an ancient race of robots which periodically remove all advanced civilizations from the galaxy. And in order to save the galaxy, Shepard must assemble a ragtag crew of humans and aliens to stop him. And the path to doing so puts the player in several difficult positions, impacting not only the future story, but also the companions, which you grow quite close to. For just one example, one of your companions, Urdnot Rex, is a Krogan. The Krogan are a warmongering race that solve most problems with bloodlust and rage. And to solve this problem, another race, the Turians, implanted genophage within their populace, making many of them infertile. And with these infertility rates so high, it's effectively doomed their race. And in pursuing Saren, you discover that he's actually discovered a cure for the genophage and intends to breed a Krogan army for his own uses. But when this is discovered, the intent is to destroy Saren's laboratory and everything in it, and this enrages Rex. When confronted, your human crewmates actually suggest killing Rex on the spot, and in fact, if you actually languish and try to calm him down reasonably, one of your teammates, Ashley, will shoot him against your own wishes. And so your decisions matter. Ultimately, you choose whether or not Rex lives or dies, and unbeknownst to the player at this point, goes on to be an important character in later games. And while this is but one example in which a core member of your team lives or dies, you actually can't finish Mass Effect 1 with every crewmate having survived. You must choose at one point to sacrifice somebody. And this is masterful storytelling. While the impact of our decisions has yet to be seen, as there's a promise that each decision we made will have an outcome, we do see the immediate impact of the decisions we make, whether or not people live or die. And this not only has story impacts, but gameplay impacts as well. They are your companions, and losing them means losing a member of your team. And so these choices create a sense of genuine agency. influencing the story, the character relationships, and our own gameplay. The game told us that our decisions matter, and we are seeing it in real time. And while Mass Effect 1 only has 2 endings, the way we get there is incredibly unique, and we feel the weight of each decision on the way. No 2 playthroughs the same, guaranteed. And to me, this was so well done that it wasn't improved upon until recently in Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 focuses on a disparate group of adventurers who all have one thing in common. They've all been abducted by Mind Flayers, a group of squid-faced aliens hell-bent on dominating all planes of existence. Aboard their ship, you and your companions are implanted with a parasite, doomed to become Mind Flayers yourselves in a few days' time, sworn to serve as part of their illithid hive mind. And the cast of characters couldn't be more diverse, from an racist elf cleric to an over-ambitious human wizard or a flamboyant vampire rogue. Your companions are the embodiment of dysfunction, all of which have their own personal struggles, both in their past and with each other. Yet, you're all stuck traveling together if you want to try to get these parasites out of your head. And this is the heart of a truly great story. And this party is tied together by you, your actions. And even what it means to be you in Baldur's Gate 3 is pretty interesting. While you could create a fully customizable character and slot whoever you want into the story, you can also choose to play as any of the named characters within the game. And so each playthrough can be done through a slightly different viewpoint, as each character has their own unique backstory and motivations. Building upon what I believe are the core tenets of Mass Effect 1, Baldur's Gate 3 develops this to the next level. The game is endlessly offering you choices which impact the narrative of the game and your companions themselves, which can even result in their deaths. This goes so far as to even allow you to ally with the enemy forces within the first act of the game, changing the scope of the narrative completely. And yes, there are a few moments that are entirely scripted plot points which are unavoidable, regardless of which path you take. But the way in which you get there, by either allying with the forces of evil or good with which companions, is each unique, each offering its own unique dialogue and choices. Your actions have immediate and lasting effects, all of which culminating to an endgame that is entirely dependent on the choices you made in the earlier acts. As the final battle builds into a large war, how many allies you've recruited directly impacts essentially the difficulty of the final fight. And so, playing in a less selfish good run will result in a much easier final fight with many allies, despite the game itself being more difficult for the majority. And if you allied with the evil forces early on, you lose many of your good companions, resulting in you fighting against the Illithids alone in the final fight. And all of this increases a player's sense of agency within the game. There are several branching narratives within the game, each act concluding with its own subplot. And all of this culminates into a finale in which is heavily influenced by which companions you have the closest relationship with. And so unique is the story that if you were to tally up all the different variations of endings you can get, there are over 17,000. How's that for being able to impact the story? And so if Mass Effect 1 was such good groundwork for a game that's storytelling as advanced as Baldur's Gate 3, one must imagine that Mass Effect 2 was a vast improvement, right? And now for a mid-roll fun fact. Did you know that cows have best friends? Research shows that if 2 cows spend enough time together, when they become separated, they begin to get really stressed out. And if you're still watching, thank you so much for making it to the midpoint of the video. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Unfortunately, if Mass Effect 1 was genre-defining, Mass Effect 2 is frustratingly average. While the gameplay elements of Mass Effect 2 are actually vastly improved in my opinion, the storytelling begins to take a massive step backwards. And don't get me wrong, while there are several decisions in Mass Effect 2 that have a promise that these will matter in time, the decisions which have an immediate impact are entirely removed. While you can decide to not recruit companions, there is never a decision in the game which actively forces you to choose a side between one or another. And a shift thus occurs that instead of actually feeling the weight of our decisions, we are assured that they matter instead. And peeking forward into Mass Effect 3, only 2 of the decisions in the game carry forward in a meaningful way. One of which is either preserving or destroying the genophage cure which Mordin was able to discover, or whether or not Tali gets exiled in her loyalty mission. A further promise that this will be meaningful later. And to me, this unfortunately culminates in the game's ending, making it entirely disappointing. Rather than the ending being a culmination of all our decisions throughout the game, and potentially even Mass Effect 1, it instead boils down to whether or not we've completed the game as much as possible, fully upgrading our ship, and a handful of decisions we make on who we send to the final mission. This being the only time that your crewmates can die, entirely dependent on what you choose and how upgraded your ship is. And ultimately, if you had to ask me why Mass Effect 3 was so poorly received, it actually traces back to this moment. And here at this juncture it becomes clear that all the unfinished plot points in Mass Effect 1 and those newly introduced in Mass Effect 2 will have to conclude in a Mass Effect 3. A promise that the choices we made thus far did matter, we just need to play the third game to find out. And the ending itself additionally falls flat, as much like Mass Effect 1, it only has 2 endings, and a third if you count the one in which Shepard dies. While in the first game, the 2 endings didn't seem like a problem, as the decisions we made throughout the game were meaningful. But now this feels like a placeholder, an ending of things to come that will conclude at a later time. Well, what solution could there be, you might ask, and unfortunately, had Mass Effect 2 and 3 released after The Witcher 3, I think they may have learned a thing or two. The Witcher 3, much like Mass Effect if the number is any indication, is a story told in 3 parts. In The Witcher 3 you play as Geralt of Rivia, who seeks to find his adopted daughter who's being hunted by the Wild Hunt and prevent bringing about the White Frost, which would end the world. No big deal, just your average Tuesday, I guess. And this story is very much one on rails. And while there are some things that carry over from The Witcher 2, these are largely whoever just lived or died, which only develop side stories and subplots. But The Witcher 3 contains several critical decisions throughout the game, which at the time appear to have no lasting impact. Do you take part in the assassination of a mad king who seeks to eliminate all witches from the world? Do you give some research notes on a dangerous plague to a witch who tried to manipulate you into giving them to her? Do you romance Yennefer or die alone because you tried to have a threesome? While none of these decisions have an immediate impact on the story, unbeknownst to the player, they will, and in a meaningful way. While The Witcher 3 only has 3 main endings, following this there are additional character endings to show what the future of each character entails. And if you count all of these, there's a total of 36 different endings to the game, a far cry short of the 17,000 of Baldur's Gate 3, but this game didn't promise to allow you to change the story that much. The success of The Witcher 3 in balancing player choice with a coherent story highlights how genuine choices can enhance the narrative experience of the game. The game's approach to choice and consequence ensure a player feels agency in their decisions, even if it's only felt at the end of the game. And this ultimately is where Mass Effect 3 fails miserably. And I'd like to begin this segment by noting that Mass Effect 3 is a great game. It has the best gameplay of the series, hands down. The level designs are vastly improved, and the gameplay mechanics feel like they've been mastered. If it had gone by any other name, Mass Effect 3 would have been remembered as a perfectly good game. We ruined it. The choices we made it worse. And that's not our fault, to be sure. It was a promise made to us, one that was broken. Some subplots do indeed conclude in the middle of Mass Effect 3. You can finally choose to cure the genophage, forcing you to choose between Rex and Mordin, who are no longer playable characters but are background story characters. But after hundreds of hours of gameplay and a promise that our decisions all mattered, Mass Effect 3 boils down to 3 simple endings: red, blue, and green. I mean, destroy, control, synthesis. Like, seriously, why do you think that color coding them was a good idea? And so, after hundreds of hours of gameplay, we can choose to try to fight the Reapers with Shepard, possibly sacrificing him and the crew, try to control the Reapers, which will sacrifice Shepard, but he takes control of them, saving the Earth. Or he can sacrifice himself to try to merge all life with synthetics, removing the need for the Reapers to destroy the galaxy. And a fourth ending, do nothing and just let the Reapers destroy the galaxy. And there is a perfect ending in which, if you choose the destroy path and have the galaxy be prepared enough, Shepard survives the encounter. But this is a disappointing ending. In many of them, Shepard dies, and more than that, we're entirely oblivious to what happens to most of the side characters. Worse still, in order to unlock some of the best endings, you had to play multiplayer to unlock war assets. And worst of all, and what's kind of fucked up, is that if you played the previous games, your endings are actually further limited instead of expanded. If you don't have enough war assets, you're actually limited to the decision that you made in Mass Effect 2's ending. And this can result in you actually only having one choice of an ending, or the do-nothing one. And the Legendary Edition somewhat corrects this. They've removed the online multiplayer, and because of that, they had to find a new way of increasing your war assets, which is now tied to some of the decisions you made from the previous games. But this is a huge cop-out. Your decisions still don't have the narrative weight that they should, and instead amount to a series of points for each decision that you've made. You never do find out what happens to your crewmates. The Mass Effect series to me is the perfect example of what an illusion of choice is. The promise that's made that our decisions matter, and ultimately, they don't. And in Mass Effect's case, actually hurts the player for being a fan and playing their previous titles. And when compared to other titles like Baldur's Gate 3 and The Witcher 3, in which our decisions do have agency, it's clear that Mass Effect 1 was the best at storytelling of the entire series. There was impact to our decisions, and we changed the story through our actions. And so, Mass Effect 3 should serve as a cautionary tale to developers to not promise the world to their fans. Because sometimes when a game promises us that we can do whatever we want, when you look behind the curtain, we find out that we don't matter. Hey everyone, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and that you enjoyed the Illusion of Choice video that you all voted for in my comment section. Don't forget to check back for future polls and video voting and any sneak peeks into future projects I'm working on. And if you're still watching, thank you again so much for your support. As you know, it really helps these videos and your support is truly meaningful to me. Honestly, thank you. And as always, I want to remind you that you are loved and valuable. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!